Hi, Andrew Cuneo with another YouTube video here. Today it's going to be a historic deck tech. This is the Izzet deck that I played in the most recent set championship in the historic portion. I didn't do great in the tournament. I started out 2-1 with this deck, and then my standard deck kind of let me down. I beat food decks twice, and I lost once to the red-black kind of mid-range deck a bunch of my teammates played. I thought I would go over this deck and, more importantly, go over the cards from Alchemy. And I don't think any of them are good enough to make the deck, but I'll go over kind of my thought process for considering them. So let's start out by doing that. That should show us all the cards. All right, so I'm going to skip over a lot of these. Like Clone Crafter, you obviously aren't going to put it in a control deck. Geist Channeler might be a little bit appealing. There is Magma Opus, but I don't think you really have enough targets. Even a bunch of the 3-mana cards, Anger of the Gods and Archmage's Charm, don't really work with Geist Channeler. Absorb Energy, I think you can just do better if you're going to spend 3 mana for a counter. Like, I think this card's almost always going to be worse than Saw It Coming, which I don't even have in my deck. It's certainly much worse than Archmage's Charm. Archmage's Charm, I think, is one of the best cards in Historic. No on these guys. So this is a card, Unexpected Conversion, I've liked a lot in Alchemy with just the standard sets, but I don't think it's really good enough for Historic. It's certainly a worse card than Archmage's Charm and Expressive Iteration. Also, this is a Torrential Gearhulk deck, so putting sorcery speed things in your deck, they have to be really exceptional, and I don't think this card is that. This card's just too expensive. So Discover the Formula is one that you would at least consider because it is such a good target for Torrential Gearhulk, but it is really expensive, so you have to ask yourself, is this card really going to be better with Torrential Gearhulk than Sublime Epiphany? And the answer is just no, it can't possibly be. It's also worse with Torrential Gearhulk than Magma Opus, pretty clearly, I would say, because Magma Opus helps you cast the Torrential Gearhulk. So yeah, this one is at least worth a little bit of thought, but I think it's a pretty clear no. Moving on, you wouldn't play this card. Electrostatic Blast. I think this card might have a place in Historic, but if you're going to use this card, it's going to be in a deck that wants to play at sorcery speed, because this card encourages you to cast your next instant or sorcery on your own turn, so you can, at a minimum make a land drop with the cards you would hit. It's way worse if you're hitting, a counter spell and 2 lands or something, because you wouldn't necessarily even be able to use them if you were playing an instant on your opponent's turn, or even if you were playing a sorcery on your turn. So I think this one's a clear no. I think that it's pretty hard for this card to be better than Bone Crusher Giant, just in kind of any deck in Historic. So I don't think that one's worth playing. Obviously no on this one. This card maybe is good in Historic decks, but it would be a different kind of deck, so no on that one. No on this one. If you really wanted like a small creature to sideboard in, you could maybe consider this. I think it's probably going to be worse than Malevolent Hermit, and I don't even usually like playing cards like that anyway in the sideboard. Brittle Blast is at least a little bit interesting. In Historic, you have access to Lava Coil, but this is at least an instant that works with Torrential Gearhulk, and it also, the fact that it gives everything, the fact that they exile when they die instead is maybe going to be relevant some of the time. Of course, it's going to be not really reasonable to try to catch a Cauldron Familiar if they have a Witch's Oven with Brittle Blast. So I don't think this card's good enough. Conductive Current, worth a little bit of a thought, but there's access to Anger of the Gods. There's also access to Sweltering Suns, so I don't think that's worth it. The rest of these cards aren't really kind of cards you'd put in the control deck. Forsaken Crossroads is a land I've liked a lot in the standard version of Alchemy, but I think when you get into Historic, you have access to so many dual lands that at least in a 2-color deck, you're almost always going to do better. If you look at the mana base of this deck, I'm not playing any Pathways, and I'm only playing 3 Sulfur Falls. So I think that the Pathways and Sulfur Falls are pretty clearly better than this card. So that's all of the, I guess there's the artifacts too. The one that maybe is a little bit interesting is Key to the Archive, but I think it's a little bit too slow for Historic. So that's all the cards. I haven't added any of them to my deck because I don't think any of them are good enough for this. Just going over the deck in general, it's a Torrential Gearhulk deck. So it's got a mana base to support Archmage's Charm. And the one thing that's different about this deck from other, like a Jeskai control deck, is I've really gone out of my way to support Unholy Heat. I've got 4 copies of Unholy Heat, and I'm playing Soul Guide Lantern to give me artifacts that go to the graveyard. I'm playing Shark Typhoon to give me enchantments that go to the graveyard. I'm playing Narsets to have a cheap Planeswalker that can go to the graveyard. And I'm playing 4 Fabled Passages to have lands that go to the graveyard. So this deck is very much built to try to get Unholy Heat on fairly early on in the game. Like, it's never going to be on turn 2, but turn 4 or 5, it's reasonable for it to be able to get turned on. One question I get a lot when I play with this deck is, I'm playing Magma Opus, Torrential Gearhulk. Why am I not playing Mizzix's Mastery? And the answer is there's a couple parts to that answer. First of all, I think that the Mastery Opus thing is really only good against certain kinds of decks. It's good against small creature decks where the creatures are trying to attack you, especially on the ground. Because if you're thinking about it, if you're going to put Opus Mastery in your deck, the kind of highest upside plays, you're going to go turn 2, discard the Opus, turn 3, Mastery, deal 4 points of damage, get a 4/4, draw 2 cards. And you have to ask yourself, is that 4 points of damage really going to be doing anything relevant? And if your opponent hasn't put small creatures into play, the answer is no. Is the 4/4 creature going to be doing anything relevant? And against, like, Cat Oven, the answer is often going to be just having a 4/4 ground creature doesn't do anything against Cat Oven. So I don't like it against the Cat Oven decks. It is good against like a white-green humans deck. Even the white-green life gain deck, it's not necessarily going to be that good against. So I don't really think that Mastery Opus is that well situated for Historic, at least against the top decks in the format. The other thing I don't like about Mastery Opus is if you're going to put that in your main deck, you have to have a sideboard where you can take it out a lot of the time. Because especially if you have a lot of copies of Mizzix's Mastery and Torrential Gearhulk in your deck, you're going to be very vulnerable to sideboarded graveyard hate, which I'd rather not be. So this deck, I've got 3 Torrential Gearhulks in my deck. That's my only thing that really uses the graveyard. I guess Search for Azcanta uses it too. But Torrential Gearhulk, even if they play Rest in Peace, you're still going to get a 5/6 flash, which is good a lot of the times in sideboarded games, especially if your opponent's diluted their deck with cards like Rest in Peace. So they're just going to be less aggressive. They're going to have fewer answers to your creatures. They boarded something out for their Rest in Pieces, which means that their deck is more susceptible just to a 5/6 flash creature. Rest in Peace also hits Unholy Heat, so you may need to think about whether or not that's going to be on. So you're not completely immune to graveyard hate, but you're not susceptible to it, I would say, with a configuration like this. So those are the main reasons I don't like Mizzix's Mastery. The other thing I'm going to say is just Opus plus Gearhulk. It's good on its own. You don't need to have Mastery to make Opus good, especially in a control deck like this, where a lot of the times you're going to be happy just to make the Lotus Petal from Magma Opus on turn 2 because it's going to allow you on turn 4 to play Expressive Iteration and still have access to Archmage's Charm. Or play Narset and still have access to Censor early on in the game. The extra mana that it makes does actually allow you to play out your turns 3, 4, and 5 more safely and more easily in some of the games. So that is actually a somewhat useful part of the card. Also, this deck, you get to 8 mana in play and you just cast Magma Opus in a lot of games. So don't think of Magma Opus as just strictly a combo card that's working with Mastery and Torrential Gearhulk. It actually functions fine just on its own in the deck. guess I'll go through the sideboard real quick. This is perhaps a little bit unusual for a sideboard if you're not used to looking at control sideboards, in that it has a pretty wide range of cards. There's a bunch of one-ofs. You definitely, if you're a Gearhulk deck, you want to bias towards playing good instants in your sideboard. So Aether Gust, just generally a great card, and it's an instant. Abrade, same thing. Cinderclasm, this is kind of my 5th sweeper. I have 4 copies of Anger of the Gods. After sideboarding, I started liking Cinderclasm in Historic with the printing of Esper Sentinel, because it's a pretty popular thing to try to just play Esper Sentinel and Thalia together. This is a really effective sweeper against 1 toughness creatures, and it also scales up to 2 toughness creatures. So this is primarily for humans kind of decks, or the White Greed Heliod deck. I like having 1 Fry in case I play against people who are playing Teferi or Narset. I don't necessarily want to feel like I have to have Unholy Heat in my deck against a Teferi deck, especially because in that matchup, it's a little bit harder to get Delirium on, because you're not necessarily going to want to have Soul Guide and Lantern in your deck anymore. You're not going to have Anger of the Gods anymore, so you don't really have that many sorceries. So you don't really want to be relying on Unholy Heat getting to the point that it can kill a Teferi on its own. So 1 Fry is nice. Also, the uncounterability matters a ton. This is also a great card if you play against Merfolk, because it kills Svaloon, and they can't use a soft counter to protect it. So just a great card. This deck is really tight on sideboard space, which is why I don't have multiples on any of these things I'm saying are really great cards. 2 Mystical Disputes, obviously just great against blue decks, also very good against Merfolk decks. Being able to go up to 4 Anger of the Gods is great. I think it's an incredible sweeper in Historic, so you might as well have access to 4. One thing I will note about the mana base of this deck is I'm playing Fabled Passage. There's Archmage Charm, and there's Anger of the Gods. There's going to be a lot of tension when you first crack Fabled Passage, that if you want to get to double red, you might feel really tempted to get the Mountain, but it's going to make it so you can't play Archmage's Charm on turn 3, so you're really going to have to think about how you want your turn 3 to go when you're cracking a Fabled Passage on turn 1 or 2. If you want to have access to Anger of the Gods, you might need to get the Mountain, because you need a Mountain plus a dual land to cast the Anger of the Gods. Sometimes it's really easy and you just draw 2 dual lands and this doesn't come up. But the deck has a lot of basics in it because it has playing 4 Fabled Passages. So sometimes you are going to have this awkward situation where you want to fetch the Mountain, but it's going to turn off Archmage's Charm, and you're just going to have to make a tough decision in those spots. Moving on, Soul Guide Lantern. I think it's the best Graveyard Hate card for this deck. One thing I didn't mention about just playing Soul Guide Lantern in your main deck is great. A lot of decks, especially Izzet Phoenix, they're built under the assumption that they're not going to have to play against Graveyard Hate in Game 1. So just having Game 1 Graveyard Hate that's very effective is tremendous. It's going to win you a lot of games against Izzet Phoenix if you just draw a Soul Guide Lantern in your opening hand. It's going to make their deck much, much harder to play out. And you'll be able to, just steal a game a lot of the time with the main deck Soul Guide Lanterns. I have a 3rd Lantern to help with the Phoenix matchup or against Kroxa decks. Here we've got a Ratchet Bomb. There's also a Blast Zone in the main deck. This is primarily to deal with Trail of Crumbs. That's one of the keys to playing Control in Historic is you need to have a good plan against the food decks. And playing that matchup in particular can be pretty hard, especially if you don't have the right tools to win the matchup. It's just a horrible matchup. But you need to have answers to Trail of Crumbs. You need to be able to get Witch's Oven off the board or steal it with Archmage's Charm. That's why I've got a Ratchet Bomb. That's why I've got a Blast Zone. Ratchet Bomb can also be useful if you play against a deck that's just flooding the board with 1-drop creatures, like maybe against an Esper Sentinel deck, if they also have a lot of other 1-mana plays. If you play against one of the Enchantment Core Spirit Dancer decks, especially in the games when you're on the play, this is a pretty strong card. If you play against actual Enchantress with the White-Green Enchantress, I don't remember what it's called, and they might have, you know, Solemnity combo in their deck. Ratchet Bomb can be good. Just bear in mind, this doesn't do anything once Solemnity comes into play. You can no longer charge it up. So it's a little bit awkward in that sense, but it's just a good card for getting tough permanents to get off the board, especially if they're enchantments. Brazen Borrower, primarily to win blue mirrors. It's a good card against Shark Typhoon. A lot of the times in Historic, blue mirrors just come down to who has more Shark Typhoons and more answers to Shark Typhoon. So that's where the Brazen Borrower is going to shine. 2 discontinuities, that's the same thing about winning Shark Typhoon mirrors. It also gives you a way to counter the 6-mana blue-red Niv Mizzet or Nezahal. There are some really annoying uncounterable cards in Historic, and discontinuity can stop them. It costs 6 mana to do that a lot of the time, but it's worth it. Same thing with Thought Distortion. The 4th Shark Typhoon, like I said, that's for blue mirrors. Then 1 Field of Ruin, where if you're playing a blue mirror, sometimes you need to be able to blow up Search for Azcanta. Castle Ardenvale is less important, I would say. A lot of the times, especially in the sideboard games, Castle Ardenvale just gets overpowered by Shark Typhoons. So the 1/1s that it makes are pretty irrelevant. But certainly a flip Search for Azcanta, you're going to want to be able to Field of Ruin. Also, you might just want to increase the number of lands you have in your deck, because you do want to make your land drops to maximize your Shark Typhoons in that matchup. So that's the sideboard. I was really happy with this deck, both before and after the set championship. I haven't played it very much since Alchemy has come out, but I think it's still going to continue to just be a very strong deck. I think that if you can build a control deck where you can win the food matchup in Historic, you're in a really good position. And I'm comfortable playing the food matchup with this deck, so that's basically the reason I'm happy with the deck. I think overall control is in a good spot in Historic. The only thing that it really is scary for it is the food deck, and if you can make that a matchup where you're winning 50% of the time or more, I think you have a really strong deck. So that's where I think this deck sits. Let's go ahead and get into some of the games. 1 land on the play. Not really all that tempting to keep. If this was a blue-red land, I might actually keep it, because I've got the Soul Guard Lantern to cycle once, and then I've got 2 Expressive Iterations. But without even access to red mana, I don't think this is good enough. Way better hand. I'll go ahead and put 1 of my 6 drops on the bottom. I'll just play a tap land on the first turn. Sadly, they're probably going to take my Expressive Iteration. Arm Scavenger, interesting. I tried this guy a little bit in Alchemy, and I thought he was a little bit too awkward. I think you've got to be able to do better than that guy in Historic for your 2-drop. Maybe they have some sort of artifact sacrificing synergies that... I don't know what cards those would be. Is Shrapnel Blast on Arena? Or Arcbound Ravager? I know Arcbound Ravager is not on Arena. Alright. A little bit of free value. I felt like having to cast the cards immediately was just too awkward with this thing. Because you don't, when you play your 2-drop, you don't really want to do what the opponent's done this game, where rather than developing your board with the efficient cards you put in your deck, you don't want to spend early turns of the game just playing really, really clunky cards. like Scavenger Blade. Because I didn't find an Unholy Heat, but if I found an Unholy Heat here, I'd be able to undo their entire second and third turn for 1 mana. Which I really do not think is what you want to have happen. Soul Guide Lantern being a little bit awkward here. They are going to wind up with a bunch of extra clunky artifacts in play that maybe will become annoying as the game progresses.
You wish you had a fraction of my power.
Probably be discarding Steam Vents, but let's see what I draw. Off of one of these Soul Guide Lanterns. Yeah, definitely going to discard Steam Vents.
I really don't care about your plans.
So if they ditched a Fatal Push, they could easily have more cards like that in their hand. The emblem of this might be containable, at least in the short term, with this lantern. I'm going to need to get this off the board eventually. And they've got a Den of the Bugbear now. This game hasn't started out particularly well.
We're doing things my way.
Really just need to find an Unholy Heat, and things will be fine. It's an excellent start. Alright. Rahilda is a much more respectable 2-drop than the Arms Dealer. I think I'm going to just use Narset. If I hit Unholy Heat or Anger of the Gods, I'm pretty happy. The Gearhulk, I'd have to go like Gearhulk Archmage's Charm on my turn to prevent the Rahilda from flipping. And then they could easily just put their equipment on it, and I would wind up just having to chump block or take a ton of damage, so that's not very good. There we go. Took a while, but I finally got there. I think I can afford to let this thing plus again. Just discard Censor. Then I will have to, I'll just Gearhulk Unholy Heat it to knock its loyalty back down to 1.
You think too much.
This is probably going to spell the end of my Narset.
Such violence is upsetting.
So if they want to, they can they afford to minus this? No, it's -3. I was going to say, they can get this thing to 5 power by putting these horrible equipment on it. It costs 5 mana to equip both of these. So they can make this into a 5/1. This Liliana is really not a particularly good card. They've attacked my hand with it, but they've also attacked their hand. Like, they've discarded Fatal Push, which would have been a relevant card. Well, that is definitely a relevant card. That's really bad for me. All right. I thought I would turn the corner, but maybe not. What could I hit that would be something I'd played Sorcery Speed? I guess there's no more Expressive Iterations left in my deck. There is 2 Narsets, and there's an Anger of the Gods. I don't necessarily want to lose 3 life anyway, so I probably wouldn't even play this land. Alright, that is excellent. In response to the Liliana Plus, I'm going to Archmage's Charm. I'm just going to Archmage's Charm counter that instead. Be drawing 2 extra cards. The tokens are going to be annoying because of all these equipment. I think I'm probably losing this game at this point. Need to just keep this in my hand and discard it.
I really don't care about your plans.
So I can kill this, block this, die to Den of the Bugbear. I'm just dead. It was an awkward game. What don't I want? Did Colgan's Command, which the Lantern fights against some. They also had a Graveyard Trespasser, which got discarded to the Planeswalker. I think I'm not that worried about the Planeswalker. I think I'm going to take out 1 Shark Typhoon just because it's kind of inefficient. I'm going to take out Commit. I'm going to play Anger and Abrade. Sometimes I like boarding Censor out against black decks that have a lot of discard. The deck didn't seem to have that much discard. And I'm going to be on the play, so I'll just go ahead and leave Censor in for now. I think I'm going to swap the Blast Zone for a Field of Ruin because of the Den of the Bugbear. So the deck probably has 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Inquisition, or maybe 4 and 2. If we get to a game 3, I think I'll be looking to trim some censors. Just to have more efficient interactive cards. I think I'm going to wait to cast the Narset until after I play the Archmage's Charm. We'll see what they do with their turn. Yeah, that's good enough for me to counter it.
Past, present, and future with thoughtfulness before action.
Well, I guess Anger of the Gods doesn't even work yet. This thing is good against Torrential Gearhulk.
Meditate and prepare.
Definitely want to flip it back to day.
I know
Because once it's day, I have a lot more cards that can kill this.
I have just the trick for this.
Graveyard Trespasser is also kind of annoying for the Unholy Heats in my deck.
My mind needs a rest.
This battle is going to end on my terms. Sorry for your loss.
Still at a high life total. And I'm still going to have access to a lot of cards. Should I counter that? I think I'm going to start out by just drawing a card to see if I draw into a Anger of the Gods. I didn't. I could just try to Magma Opus it, but I guess if I counter it... Yeah, I'm going to counter it. They'll attack with the Trespasser and eat it. And then I'll discard the Magma Opus to the Liliana. Guess they're going to eat the Magma Opus instead. That's fine.
I have no interest in fighting fair.
I'll just take the Archmage's Charm.
You only think you've won.
Come on, no Colligan's Command. If they have Colligan's Command, I could still be in trouble. If they don't have Colligan's Command, I think this one's about over. Soren the Merciless.
My will must be. I bring my own army. My ways are not for the weak.
Go ahead and make a 3/3. They would obviously take Shark Typhoon if I let the Thoughtseize resolve. They're getting the Censor, which is not nothing, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. I've got 15 power in play right now, so not quite lethal, but they're not coming back. Alright, like I said, I think I don't want to have this many Censors in my deck. I think I want to have Anger of the Gods because of all those Graveyard Trespassers. And also the Rahilda. I don't think I saw enough stuff that Aether Gust is good against. I'm probably also just going to play another Shark Typhoon on the draw. It's a little bit weird to have more Shark Typhoons on the draw, but against the black decks, I like just having more cards that are 2-for-1s. Because especially in Historic, they can just bury you in a sea of discard. And if you don't ever start resolving 2-for-1s, you never really can get back in the game. So Shark Typhoon's a kind of weird 2-for-1 in that it's usually just going to be like a 2/2 that also draws you a card. But that can be good enough a lot of the time, especially for pressuring their planeswalkers. Not sure if I'm going to want to discard the Magma Opus right away. It's going to depend on how they play out their hand. They do have cards that can exile it from the graveyard. Also, they just have discard cards where I get to choose what to discard, so just having the Opus in my hand protects other cards in my hand. Such as that. I think I'll just go ahead and discard the Opus over a land. Kroxa can be really annoying for this deck if I don't find a Soul Guide Lantern quickly. Definitely counter one of their 4-mana Planeswalkers. They didn't do anything. Guess I'll just make a 1/1. A little bit nervous that they have a 4-mana Planeswalker in their hand. If they have Kolaghan's Command, it's a little bit annoying that they can just take out the Shark and make me discard a card. But Kolaghan's Command, unless I can counter, it's always going to be a 2-for-1. So here I'm turning it into a 1-for-1, in a sense. They chose not to take out the token. I guess that makes sense from their perspective. Cards they have. This will be their 4th card in the yard. I think I can safely pitch the Censor. Alright, a bunch of 2-for-1s is just what I needed. I think I'm going to be casting Anger of the Gods this turn. 1/1 Shark isn't particularly useful, and exiling the Rahilda slows down the Kroxa, which is important. Also, I get to keep Abrade, which Abrade can hit this Hive of the Eye Tyrant.
Out of my way. I have a way to stop. Blood for knowledge.
They haven't shown any instant speed graveyard interaction, so I'm going to make this somewhat greedier play of going for the Magma Opus on their upkeep to tap down their lands. If they have Cling to Dust, I'll be very sad. Getting a bunch of red mana. What are you doing to me with your red mana? You're playing Fry. Okay. You've weakened the Torrential Gearhulk. There might be a Kolaghan's Command in this Torrential Gearhulk's future, although they could just kill it by destroying an artifact. What card are they going to have that deals damage? It's still in their deck. That's kind of weird.
My ways are not for the weak.
It's probably goodbye for my Narset. Yeah. Well, that Fry play probably made no sense. I may need to shock this Steam Vents into play if I want access to Censor on turn 2. So I'll just play this land tapped to start. And we'll shock this out. If they don't do anything, I think I'm just going to pitch the Opus. Definitely want to censor that one. Missing a land drop here is very much not good. Narset at least slows the Swaloon down for a turn. Both they have to attack it and the draw trigger doesn't work. I wonder if they have Merfolk in their deck, or this is just like a 3/4 Scroll Thief. I hadn't thought about just putting this in a deck without other Merfolk. Actually seems pretty good. Certainly in this situation, it's pretty good. And more Narsets.
I train every day. No one can keep an open mind.
This game's probably beyond salvaging at this point. Maybe if I'm able to turn on Delirium for next turn, which I'm going to be able to get to 3 things with the Shark Typhoon. So like if I cycle into a Fabled Passage, I could then Unholy Heat the Swaloon. They have a lot of Narsets.
Mind and body should move in unison, like wind.
Perhaps even more than I do.
Prepare.
I do really need this Unholy Heat, but I think if I play Archmage's Charm, they'll just counter it with Drown in the Lock. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and make a 1/1. This will give me something that can pressure the Narset. And then I need to just hope to draw another Unholy Heat. All the Archmage's charms in the world.
Interesting technique.
But they have all Narsets and I don't have enough lands. Not exactly fair.
You are
Okay.
I have just the trick for this.
At least there's a Narset off the board. And they found their 4th Narset. This person knows what they like, and what they like is Narset. I would guess this is going to bait the Drown and the Lockout. If I could kill the Svaloon, I think I could still get back in this game. It really just takes drawing a Fabled Passage. Might need that shark to chump the Hall of Storm Giants. I can cast Commit now on Saloon, and that'll put a sorcery in my graveyard, so then I'll be able to Unholy Heat. There is the problem that I'm at 7 life and they have a Hall of Storm Giants and I don't have enough lands to fight it. I would assume I'm going to die to Fatal Push here, but maybe not. Still battling. I have two choices. I can either double Unholy Heat the Hall of Storm Giants or try to steal the shark with the Archmage's Charm to chump. I think steal and try to chump is probably better. Doesn't really matter. I can't beat them having a spell either way. Fell behind too much at the start of that game. Alright, I think I want Brazen Borrower. I want Field of Ruin. I want Shark Typhoon. I definitely want Mystical Disputes. And I definitely want Fry. Not sure about the discontinuities. They had Shark Typhoon, but they're also going to have a lot of discard. Discontinuity is really awkward to use against somebody who sees it coming. Definitely don't want to Anger the Gods. I don't think I need the Blast Zone. Can probably trim on Unholy Heat as well. Probably something like that. Their deck seems pretty well set up to compete against mine. I'm not sure how they would do against a food deck. But maybe they have a plan that we just aren't going to get to see because I'm not playing a food deck. Having access to Expressive Iteration is basically the strength of my deck in this matchup. That's where my deck shines. So it's nice to draw one. I'm going to sit on the Censor for a little bit. Castle Vantress is certainly an excellent card to have access to. I'm really not a very big fan of Castle Vantress. I have one in my deck because it seems worth playing one, but I think the effect on this card is just really weak. It's almost never going to matter in games. That worked out really well. I assume they're using this to try to clear the way for a Narset. The fact that I drew into a card that they have to take for their Narset to be able to come out is excellent. No, they have Spaloon. Kind of the same thing as a Narset, just a little different. Saw this story before. That my Narsets at least buy a turn against the Spaloon.
I must train harder.
Their Hall of the Storm Giants is probably a lot better than mine. They have access to cards like Drown in the Lock and Fatal Push if they want it to kill it. And I just have the Field of Ruin. At least I drew my Field of Ruin. That's pretty nice. I think I'm actually going to shock this into play rather than play the Field of Ruin. The reason is I think they played a Field of Ruin in the first game, and I don't want them to have access to just fielding my Field of Ruin if they decide that they really want to base their game plan around the Hall of Storm Giants. So they're 100% representing that they have Mystical Dispute in their hand by making a 1/1 Shark and leaving a blue untapped. Could be a bluff, but it is certainly a very reasonable card for them to have in their deck. So I think it's a card they could easily have in their hand. This game's gotten a little bit precarious. Wow, Thief of Sanity. That's not one you see every day. It's going to be good against me, though. This is a card that really, really became very hard to play with the printing of Shark Typhoon. I think I now need to hope that they only have Mystical Dispute. So by cycling the Magma Opus like that, I'm making it so that I can potentially resolve the Torrential Gearhulk. Should I just go for it in their upkeep? If I do it in their upkeep, they have an additional shot. They have like a negate off the Castle Lochtwain. I think I'm still going to go for it in their upkeep. I'm not 100% dead if it doesn't work. And I get a second shot if I just wait another turn. Well, I get a second shot the next turn. So I might as well force them to tap the mana in their upkeep. Cling to Dust the Opus. They're going to force the issue. They have Double Dispute. Yeah, okay. And they can Cling to Dust again, which is really annoying. See if I can bait them into doing something about Search for Azcanta. It obviously doesn't matter at all. Yeah. I can try to Gearhulk Archmage's Charm, but they just Cling to Dust the Archmage's Charm and I die. Or they do that. Wow, that was a horrifically bad matchup for my deck. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that look into Historic Control. I didn't really get to play against any of what I would consider the Tier 1 decks, where I think that my deck is pretty well situated. But it wasn't very good against the blue-black All Mystical Disputes and Narset's deck. It was fine against that black-red deck. That's all I've got for now. If you like the video, please remember to sub to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment if you've got something you really want to say. I do read all the comments. And hope to see you next time. Thanks.